She picked up a chair and threw it at her own son because he refused to change our wedding venue. I watched it happen over a video call. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood in my apartment in Savannah, Georgia, holding my phone with both hands, watching the man I was about to marry shield his face in his mother's kitchen, while his entire family stood in that room and did absolutely nothing. Not one single person moved. My name is Tessa Marlowe. I'm 26 years old. I'm an interior design coordinator, and until 4 months ago, I genuinely believed the hardest part of planning a wedding was choosing the right centerpiece. The flowers, the font on the invitations, the exact shade of white for the tablecloths. I was wrong about that in ways I am still untangling, sitting here now, trying to figure out where the story actually began and what I missed along the way. Graydon and I had been together 3 years. He was 29, steady in a way that felt genuinely rare, the kind of man who remembered small things without being asked. The way I liked my coffee, the name of my childhood dog, the specific look I got when I was pretending not to be upset about something. We got engaged on a quiet evening on a bridge near my apartment, with no photographer, no crowd, no grand gesture planned in advance. Just him and me, and a ring he had chosen entirely on his own. It was ours. Completely and entirely ours. His mother, Vivienne, had a completely different vision for what our wedding should look like. She wanted a ballroom, engraved invitations, a guest list of 200 people, including her book club president, a city councilman she had met exactly once at a fundraiser, and 3 neighborhood women she was clearly trying to impress. She wanted centerpieces that cost more than my monthly rent. She wanted a wedding that performed a certain kind of status to a certain group of people who, as far as I could tell, had never once actually shown up for Graydon in any meaningful way. We were paying for everything ourselves. That fact meant absolutely nothing to her. When we told her we were keeping it small, 60 guests, string lights, wooden tables, food we actually loved, people who had genuinely been there for us, she went silent in a way that wasn't peace. It was the pause that comes before something accelerates past the point of being stopped. She told Graydon the venue looked cheap. She told him he was embarrassing the entire family. She told him flat out that she would not attend unless we changed every single detail to meet her personal standard. Graydon told her calmly and clearly that we weren't changing anything, and that was the moment everything began to shift in a way I didn't fully understand yet. It came slowly at first. The nightly phone calls that left him completely hollow, the way he started stepping outside to take them, so I wouldn't hear what his voice sounded like afterward. The short, careful texts from his younger brother Felix that were always filled with things left deliberately unsaid. My best friend Petra sat across from me one evening and said, "Tessa, this stopped being about a wedding a long time ago." I told her she was overthinking it. I was the one not thinking clearly enough, because what I didn't understand yet was this. Vivienne was not fighting about flowers or guest lists or venue choices. She was fighting because for 29 years, Graydon had been the person who absorbed everything in that family without complaint. He paid certain bills quietly. He answered every call without question. He showed up because he was the oldest, and because the shape of that family required someone to hold everything together without ever being formally asked to do it. And now, for the very first time in his life, he was choosing something she had not approved. She was not going to allow that without a serious fight. If you are new here, please stay with me through every single part of this story, because what came next is something I could not have invented if I tried. It takes 2 seconds to subscribe, and it means absolutely everything to me when someone new arrives and decides to stay. This community is the reason I keep sharing these stories, and I never take a single one of you for granted. I didn't know it yet, standing in my apartment with my coffee going cold on the counter, but Graydon was already making a decision. Quiet, careful, and completely irreversible. and his mother was about to find out exactly what that meant. He started packing on a Thursday. He hadn't told me because he knew I would worry, and he wanted to be completely certain before he said anything out loud. That was Graydon entirely. He turned hard decisions over slowly and carefully in his mind for weeks, examining every possible angle until he was absolutely sure, and only then did he speak. It was one of the things I loved most about him, and also the reason I was completely unprepared for the phone call I received that same night while standing in my bedroom folding laundry. I saw his name on the screen and answered immediately, because something in my body already knew before I even heard his voice. He didn't say hello. He just said she found the bag. And the weight of those 4 words told me everything before he had explained a single thing further. Vivienne had walked into his room, seen the packed bag sitting on the bed, and something inside her had completely detonated. She pulled everything out of the bag first, then she destroyed it. Not emptied it. Destroyed it. She tore the luggage apart with her bare hands until it was entirely unusable and beyond repair. Graydon stood there and absorbed it. Because he had spent his entire life learning that stillness was the fastest way through her storms, that going quiet and waiting was the only reliable path to the other side of them. It didn't work this time. She started screaming things that Graydon wouldn't repeat to me word for word, but described as the kind of things you don't forget no matter how much time passes. She told him he was betraying his family. She told him I had poisoned him against the people who truly loved him. She told him that if he walked out that door, he was choosing a woman over his own blood, and that she would make certain everyone in that family knew exactly what kind of son he had decided to become. Felix stood in the doorway the entire time, 19 years old, watching his brother absorb every single word of it. And he didn't move. Not because he didn't care. I genuinely believe it was because he had grown up in that same house, and had never once been shown that what he was watching required any kind of intervention. That detail broke something in me when Graydon described it later. The fact that Felix stood there and didn't move told me more about what life inside that house had always looked like than anything Graydon had ever shared with me directly. I called Petra the moment I got off the phone. She picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting once, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said simply, "You need to go there." I told her I wasn't sure that was the right move. She said, "Tessa, he is alone in that house right now, and he needs to know you are real and that you are not going anywhere." I booked a flight 40 minutes later, without second-guessing it even once. What I didn't know was that the night I flew in would be the exact same night. Vivienne decided that words alone were no longer a sufficient weapon in her arsenal. I landed and went straight to Graydon. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in 30 hours, which he hadn't. We sat in his car outside a gas station and talked for a long time, and somewhere deep in that conversation, he said something that completely reframed every single interaction I had ever had with his mother. He said, "She has never once not gotten what she wanted, not in my entire life. I genuinely don't think she understands where her authority ends and other people begin." I thought about what it does to a person when no one around them has ever said no. When every storm they create gets quietly absorbed by the people closest to them. I thought about Graydon at 19 and 23 and 27, carrying weight he was never supposed to carry alone. And I thought about what it meant that he was only now, at 29 years old, finally saying something completely different. She had torn his luggage apart with her bare hands. And we still had not come close to the worst part yet. The video call happened 2 days after I landed. I need you to understand that I have replayed it more times than I can count, and it still does not feel entirely real even now. It feels like something I watched happen through thick glass, except my hands were shaking and my legs wouldn't hold me properly, and every single sound coming through that phone was completely and unmistakably happening in real time right in front of me. Graydon had gone back to the house to collect the rest of his belongings. He called me before he went inside because he wanted me on the line with him. I think part of him already sensed it wasn't going to stay calm, and he didn't want to be entirely alone inside whatever was about to unfold. I stayed on the call without saying a word. I watched through my screen as he pushed open the front door, and I watched Vivienne come around the corner from the kitchen before he had taken 3 full steps inside. She didn't say anything at first. She simply looked at him. The way you look at something you have already completely decided you are done trying to reason with. And then she picked up the chair. It was a wooden kitchen chair, heavier than it looks. She lifted it with both hands and threw it directly at her own son. Graydon moved sideways just in time, and it hit the wall instead of him. I heard the impact come through the phone loud and sharp. I heard him say her name once. I heard Felix somewhere in the background make a sound that wasn't quite a word, and then I watched Vivienne turn and reach for something else sitting on the counter directly behind her. I started screaming Graydon's name through the phone. I don't remember the exact words I used. I remember only the feeling of absolute helplessness. Watching something happen to someone I loved through a small screen from hundreds of miles away, and being completely unable to stop a single second of it. I remember thinking with total clarity in that moment, this is not a wedding argument. This has never been a wedding argument. This is something that was always living inside that house, waiting quietly for a reason to finally come all the way forward. Graydon got himself out. He left with some of his things and called me from the driveway with his voice completely flat in the specific way that only happens after something shatters through you and you go very still on the other side of it. He said, "I'm okay." I said, "You are not okay." He said, "I will be." I was already looking up available flights before he finished the sentence. Felix texted me while I was waiting at the airport. He said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to stop it." I told him it was not his fault, and I meant every single word. Felix had grown up inside the same house. He had absorbed the same lesson Graydon had spent years quietly unlearning. That when her storms arrived, you went completely still and waited for them to exhaust themselves. The difference now was that Graydon had finally and permanently stopped waiting. When I landed and saw him at arrivals, something shifted in my chest that I still don't have a clean or adequate word for. Relief and grief, arriving at the exact same moment and occupying exactly the same space inside me. He looked smaller than usual in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with his physical size. I hugged him, and he held on longer than he normally did, and neither of us said a single word for a long while. We just stood there in that arrivals hall while strangers moved around us on both sides, and we let the moment be exactly what it was without trying to rush past it. That night we sat in a hotel room and talked for hours. Not about Vivienne. About us. About the next 10 years. About the wedding we were absolutely still going to have. Around 2 a.m, Graydon looked at me and said, "I spent so long trying to make her comfortable with my choices that I completely forgot I never needed her permission for any of them." I let that sit in the room, right where it belonged. But Vivienne was not finished. What she did next changed everything all over again. She called his relatives, every single one she could reach before Graydon had said a single word to any of them. She told his aunts that he had abandoned his entire family for a woman who had manipulated him into cutting all contact with the people who genuinely loved him. She told his cousins that I had convinced him to exclude his own mother from the wedding purely out of spite. She told one of his uncles that our small venue had been chosen deliberately to humiliate her in front of people she cared deeply about. She constructed a complete version of events in which she was the wounded party, the abandoned mother, the devoted woman whose loving son had been quietly and systematically taken from her. And she told this version to everyone she could reach before Graydon had a single opportunity to speak for himself. I found out through Felix, who had started sending me careful messages that always opened with, "I don't want to cause problems, but I think you should know." He was walking a line inside that house that no 19-year-old should ever be placed on, caught between a mother demanding total and unquestioning loyalty and a brother he clearly loved and was genuinely frightened of losing access to. I felt for him separately from everything else that was happening around us. It was a quieter feeling. A sadder one. What Vivienne said to my family was the thing that finally crossed every remaining line I had. She called my mother. I still don't fully know how she obtained the number. She told my mother that I had pressured Graydon into planning a cheap wedding because my family couldn't contribute financially in any meaningful way. She told her that our entire relationship was built on me taking advantage of a generous and trusting man. She told her that Graydon's family had invested years into raising a good son, and that my family owed them something real for the privilege of benefiting from that. My mother called me immediately after she hung up. She wasn't crying. My mother does not cry easily, and that has always been true about her. She was something quieter and far more frightening than tears. She said, "Tessa, I need you to tell me absolutely everything from the very beginning. I need to fully understand what kind of person we are actually dealing with here." I told her all of it. Every single detail from the ballroom demands at the very beginning, straight through to the chair being thrown at the end. My mother listened the entire time without interrupting once, which is exactly where I learned that quality from, and when I finally finished, she said, "You are marrying Graydon. You are not marrying his mother, and that woman will never speak to me again for as long as I am alive." Graydon didn't know about the call to my mother until I told him that same evening. When I did, something moved across his face that I had genuinely never seen on him before. Not exactly anger. Something much older than anger and far more deeply exhausted than it. He said, "She called your mom," not as a question, just those 3 words placed down quietly between us. Like setting the final piece of something carefully into its position and seeing the full completed picture clearly for the very first time. We made our decision that same night. Not dramatically. Not with a long emotional speech or a carefully prepared list of reasons laid out between us. We just looked at each other across that small hotel room and we both already knew without needing words. We were done waiting for permission that was never going to arrive. We were getting married exactly the way we had always planned, and we were not leaving any space for anyone who had spent months actively trying to dismantle what we were building together. Graydon called Felix and told him the date and where to be. Felix said, "I'll be there." No hesitation, no questions asked, no conditions attached to it. Just that. I watched Graydon's face when he heard it, and I could see it meant more to him than he was going to say out loud. What we did not see coming was Vivienne's final move. 2 days before our wedding, she left a voicemail, 11 minutes long. And what she said on it made everything that had come before it finally make complete and total sense. He told me she said that if he married me, she was removing herself from his life permanently, and that he should consider that a kindness being offered to him freely. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long moment after the voicemail ended. Then he placed it face down on the bed. Then he picked it back up and deleted it without listening to any part of it again. Then he looked across the room at me and said, "Okay, let's get married." And we did. It was the most beautiful day of my entire life. And I mean that without a single drop of performance or exaggeration in any direction. 60 people, string lights strung between wooden beams overhead, tables that felt warm and real and exactly right, food we had chosen together because we genuinely loved it, flowers that cost a completely reasonable and sensible amount of money that neither of us felt any guilt about. Petra stood beside me and started crying before the ceremony had even officially begun, which immediately made me cry, which meant my mascara was completely gone by the time I started walking toward Graydon. I did not care even slightly. Not for one single second of it. Felix sat in the front row on Graydon's side. He was the only person from that entire family who came. He wore a suit that was slightly too big across the shoulders, and he looked so genuinely young and so earnest sitting there alone in that row that something in my chest ached in the best and most unexpected way. He had driven 4 hours to be there. He had not told his mother he was going. He simply came because he wanted to. and because that is who Felix actually is underneath everything else. Graydon cried when he saw me walking toward him. Not in a composed or cinematic way, in a completely real and unguarded way, eyes already wet before I even reached him, jaw working hard to hold it together and not quite managing it, which made me love him more completely in that exact moment than I had in the moment just before it. We said our vows in front of people who had shown up because they genuinely and freely wanted to be there. Not for appearances, not for social standing or carefully managed impressions, or anyone's public image. For us. Only and entirely for us. There was no grand justice moment at the end. Vivienne did not arrive at the last minute with a softened heart or a changed mind. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public unraveling, no moment that felt designed or performed. She simply was not there, and the room was completely and warmly full of laughter and real love and good food without her in it, and that said everything I didn't need to find words for. In the weeks that followed, Graydon heard from her twice, through messages passed along by other relatives. She did not apologize in either one. She expressed that she was deeply hurt. He had gone through with it anyway without her blessing. He did not respond to either message. I don't know what happens between them next, and I have genuinely and fully stopped trying to predict or prepare for it. That relationship belongs entirely to him, and I will stand beside him through whatever shape it eventually takes on whatever timeline he needs. What I know with complete certainty is this. We built something that belongs entirely and only to us, not to her expectations, or her carefully maintained image, or the version of our lives she had decided we owed her. Ours. Built quietly on a bridge with no audience watching, grown across 3 real years of actual life together, and chosen again deliberately on a wedding day, with string lights and wooden tables, and 60 people who loved us enough to simply show up. Vivienne threw a chair at her own son because he chose his own life over her approval, and on the complete other side of that, he chose it anyway, without apology, without hesitation, without looking back. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video if you are glad you stayed all the way to the end. Leave a comment and tell me what part hit you hardest. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it right now, because this community means everything to me, and I mean that completely.